I'm Joe's mom's neighbor, Doug, and while everyone else is shopping online, let's help you put your dollar bills in order with a woman helping us all take this job and shove it. Here to share the basics of the financial independence retire early train, we welcome the co-host of the Catching Up to 5 podcast, Jackie Cummings Koski.
Look who's here. Jackie Cummings Koski joins us. How are you?
Hey, Joe, I finally get to visit you. I'm loving it.
Well, as I told you when we booked this is one of my favorite podcasting days of the year where we go back to the basics. And as I also told you, we've had some brilliant people, not Jackie brilliant, but close, where we worked our way up to getting Jackie here. But I'm super happy that you can teach us about the fire movement today, because you know there's a lot of people, especially near the holidays. You know, it's funny, I don't get burnt out much, but this time of year, I'm always looking forward to a little time off, a little time with family, and maybe somebody sitting in a job they hate, Jackie, going, you know, I don't need a little time off. Did you see the movie Office Space?
Yes, that's a classic, man, of course.
Yes. I see you've been missing some work lately. I wouldn't say I've been missing it, Bob.
Yeah. You know, so many people do feel that way. And I do love the basics. Like, I'm a teacher at heart. And even if I'm talking about something as advanced as like a 72T or whatever, I'm going to go all the way back to what is an IRA to begin with. So
you talk all the time about how your goal, your passion, your goal was to teach financial literacy. What were you doing in your career instead of teaching financial literacy before?
Oh gosh, it's kind of sad, Joe. I enjoyed the company that I worked for, and I was working my job to pay the bills. I worked for a global data company. They happen to be headquartered where I live in Dayton, Ohio. I was there for 21 years. When I started, and for years after, I didn't even know what the company did. Like, they used this corporate speak. I just knew what my job was. Early on, I did like some administrative work, you know, a little bit of spreadsheets and all that. And then I got into sales. You know, you get bonuses, you win trips. And I'm like, okay, I'll stay in sales. Even though I wasn't doing the hardcore sales, I was like account management. But that's what I did for a long time. And it had nothing to do with money or personal finance.
Wow. And
yeah.
You were how old then when this light bulb came on and you're like, oh, I don't have to trade time for money anymore, maybe?
Oh, gosh. When that light bulb came on, it was post-divorce. And it was probably a couple years after that, even a little earlier than the fire movement. I just didn't have the right label for it. So I was in my mid-30s.
When I was a financial planner, it was almost always these life changes that really kind of shook people. You know, when somebody was in my lobby, I knew they probably either had a baby, were getting married, just had their anniversary, were contemplating retirement, you know, a parent had just died, or a divorce. Was it divorce? And now it's not two paychecks, it's one that really made you start thinking about the budget?
Yeah, bingo. It was divorce. And because that changed the whole trajectory of my life. And I wasn't even really into finances before the divorce. Like, my husband did all that. Like, I was even mad one time when he refinanced the house. We got a cash out refi, and I had to go in and sign those damn papers. So I didn't even want to do that. Right. So it was kind of funny that I was not into finances at all, but the divorce shook me up to where I had no choice. So I had to start figuring this stuff out. And I've talked about this a lot, but you know, aside from all the emotional stuff and all the stress and anxiety, the one thing that stuck with me was a financial thing. And it was the fact that I had $20,000 in my 401k, and my husband had $120,000 in his 401k. So he had $100,000 more than I did. And we were roughly making the same money. I thought we were saving about the same thing. The main difference was that he was investing in different things. He was a little more aggressive. He even, this was around 2004, 2005, when banks were awesome. So he worked for a major bank, and most of his 401k was in that bank stock that was just shooting to the moon at the time. And it was just very disheartening to see that. And I'm like, okay, I got to do something different. I have to make sure I'm going to be okay and my daughter's going to be okay. So yeah, that was the wake up call.
So how did you then go from wake up call and I don't even want to go into the bank to sign these papers to now I want to teach this stuff and I'm super fired up about it? I mean, because the only Jackie I've ever known is the fired up Jackie, right? The you can do this, Jackie. You know what I mean? The let me give you a hug, Jackie, because you're going to be okay, Jackie, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when did you become this educator person?
It's so funny because I guess you're truly one of my fire friends because that's how we know each other. And that's the only Jackie you've seen. Well, it took me a couple years after my marriage. And that's when I realized the emotional and the mindset stuff is so important before you really get going. But one of my biggest motivators, I grew up in poverty. Even though I had an amazing dad, he raised, 6 kids, on a factory worker salary and all of that. One of my big dreams when I was younger was to not be in poverty, to get out of poverty, to be able to pay my bills.
I remember, so my grandparents had a fruit farm. We would all go out and help pick apples. In the fall, we'd go help pick blueberries. Like it was our
now,
job.
Is this Michigan?
This is in Michigan. Yeah.
Okay, I thought so. Yeah.
Yep. Where we're so much alike is I remember telling my aunts, I was just making conversation. I said, my goal when I grow up is to not have to work on weekends.
Yeah.
And I remember my aunts going, well, la-di-da, aren't you going to be just the richest person
Right.
alive?
Exactly.
Right. It was funny because I didn't even think it was possible to not trade my weekdays for money. I just didn't want to trade my weekend for money. And they told me that was too much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was told that too. Maybe it was that generation. But I didn't want to work on the weekend. I worked in retail for a long time.
Oh, that's definitely weekend hours.
Oh my God. By the time I did, the salary was based on 48 hours. And during the holidays, you had to work 6 days a week. And by the time I did the math, I was barely making minimum wage. So growing up in poverty and running away from that, I was running real hard away from that. So when I got divorced, that's exactly what popped in my head. It was fear of being thrust back into poverty. And my daughter being in poverty, like I never wanted her to know poverty the way that I did. I didn't want to spoil her, but I didn't want her to experience some of the things that I did. It just wasn't fun. So that was probably the biggest driving force for me right after my divorce, where I said, I got to do something different because I don't want to be back there again.
And when did this become fun?
When did it become fun?
Yeah, because now it's oh, this is fun. I want to teach other people how to do this.
Yeah. It became fun when I finally got over the hump where I'm like, you know what? If I lost everything I had today, if I still had my mind, I would be okay.
That's the best feeling, by the way.
It's an awesome feeling.
Better than the money by far.
Exactly. So I wanted other people to have that feeling. I'm like, okay, if poor little Black girl in South Carolina grew up, got out of poverty, started learning about money and personal finance, was able to dig out, reach financial independence, and retire earlier than anyone ever told me I could, I didn't do anything real magical. And I wanted other people to feel that magic because that financial literacy piece, it can be so available. But if you don't have the exposure and you don't know it's available, how do you do it? So I'm that messenger. That's why I like to stick to the basics, because if you haven't heard this message in your whole life, you can get lost real quick on some of these podcasts or some of the, not yours, Joe. So, but there's a lot out there where, and as you know, in the financial planning world, a lot of things are explained with 10-letter words, and they are not that friendly. Well, I'm an educator at heart. And so my goal is to try and educate, to advocate for financial literacy for everybody. Because if I would have had this stuff presented to me sooner or been exposed to it. So, while we were growing up, there was no social media, podcast, YouTube. It wasn't any of that. And I'm thinking, you know what, if I would have had that stuff, I think I would have found some of this stuff sooner, or I would have started digging sooner. So if financial literacy was the key for me, I know it's a key to a lot of people. And I do realize that the messenger matters. And sometimes I can say the same exact thing to, let's say, a Title I high school where most of the students are on, some kind of government benefits. Okay. When I talk about, I usually start with the fact that probably everyone in this room is doing better than I did when I was in high school. So they kind of immediately start to get it and their ears perk up a little bit. And so that's why I get so excited about this, because I know it's doable for not just an average person, but someone that might have started, way behind like I did.
The cool thing that you point out is that this is way easier than people think. It is way easier, which I think, Jackie, lowers the temperature. Like, don't get me wrong, there's some stuff that's a little technical and wonky, but you can learn that later. The big thing is, you say, number one, live on less than you earn. And initially, everybody listening here is going to go, duh, right?
Right.
But I think that this is about more, Jackie, than just the budget. I feel like your point kind of is, who you are is not what you spend anymore. Like, let's get rid of that.
Right. It's like, look at the things that are important to you. Let's see. So I was having dinner with my daughter the other day. Her and her fiance, they just love to go out to eat. They're foodies. They love to try cool new restaurants. She's always got these pictures. And I'm like, yeah, you don't need to cut that out if it brings you such joy. But you have two options. Okay. You find other things that you can cut out that you don't care about, which bingo, she immediately connected to that. She's like, yeah, there's a bunch of things I don't care about. And then the other thing was just make more money to take care of that thing, to make sure you can feed that thing. And you just are more excited when you're focusing on the thing you really love to do. And that's your why, versus I need to cut everything. This is making me miserable. That ain't going to work. It's
so funny just how simple it is. You got two options. I mean, this isn't rocket science. Number two thing you have, speaking of make more money, is maintain a high savings rate. In the FIRE movement, people have these savings rate. It's so funny. I remember when I was a financial planner, just getting people to 10 or 12% was wild. And then of course, then I start seeing these people going, oh, that's so cute. Let's try 35. If I'm having trouble saving anything right now, Jackie, where do I begin trying to get that savings rate up toward some of these big numbers you see people do?
Yeah, I've seen some people do 70%. And you know what? If you're making $400,000 a year, saving 70% might be pretty doable. But if you're making, I made an average salary about $80,000. So there's no 70% savings rate unless I wanted to live in abject poverty. And I do hear that a lot, Joe. When you're doing work with people that are in underserved communities and things like that, they are barely making it. But it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that that's a permanent state, right? Do you always think that you're going to work at Waffle House? No, that's probably going to change. But I like to talk about exercising the muscle is the important piece, the savings muscle. So the amount is not going to matter. When you think you have nothing to save, do you think you can eke out maybe $5 a month even? The idea is not the amount. The idea is to get used to automating some amount to go into savings for your long-term future. For me, my lesson was behind me, those $2 bills. That's an uncut sheet of 32 $2 bills, right? So I told you, I was growing up in poverty, managed to go to college, after high school and things like that, struggled, but, made it through. So when I was in high school, my first job, we got paper checks back then. I went to the bank. They gave me a $2 bill. I thought the $2 bill was special, so I held on to it. And every time I would cash my check, I would ask for $2 bills. I did that all through high school, on through adulthood. I kept collecting $2 bills. Now I was getting 3, 4 at a time or whatever. And finally, my daughter, she was about 10 years old. She says, Mom, how many $2 bills do you have? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's count them. We counted them. I had $3,800 worth of $2 bills.
Wow.
So you know what that taught me? That taught me when I thought I couldn't save anything, I was saving those $2 bills. So it made it so much easier. I had already worked on that skill and I had already built that muscle. So when it came time to save more because I made more, that was easy for me because I had already worked on that skill. So start working on the skill of saving, not so much the amount. The amount can be minimal. It could be just a token and a representation of you saving something. And then as you make more, you'll save more.
I love that. Yeah. Well, and I love the challenges too of let's see if we can bump it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, hey, if we bump it up a little bit and we can't do it, we'll stop. And let's just challenge ourselves to maybe do more. So there is the next thing, which is once people have that savings muscle, to your point, your husband has this this 401k that has a lot more money than yours has in it. You became a good saver, but he's out there investing, right?
Right.
So he's investing in companies. As you know, Jackie, people freak out about investing, especially in underserved communities. I remember talking to my uncle about his 401k after I become a financial planner. It was 1999. And another uncle had died, and we were at the funeral, and I'm standing next to him, and I really had nothing to talk about. I'm like, wow, the stock market's doing great. Your 401k must be doing really well. And he looks at me, he worked at General Motors, and he looks at me and he's like, yeah, that thing you put money into? And I go, yeah. Right. He goes, oh yeah, I never use that. We got the pension. He never invested, Jackie, but people freak out, right? They freak out because there's so many investment choices. With all the investment choices out there, where do we tell our beginners to start?
Yeah, well, so Joe, I was one of those people where Investee freaked her out. It really, especially at the time of my divorce, when I realized part of the reason of the disparity was the investing part. After a couple of years, I did ask myself that question: what do I like to do? What do I want to do? And it was, I wanted to learn about the stock market. I wanted to learn about investing. So I joined an investment club. Now, regardless of the type of investments we did, I took away a few things that I applied in every part of my life. One, the value of compound growth, right? The other one was always save something, but you cannot save your way to wealth. You have to invest. I don't care if it's real estate, the stock market, or whatever, and be mindful of taxes. So I went back and I said, oh, why am I not maxing out my 401k? That's investing. Why am I not maxing out my Roth IRA? That's investing. And I finally put together that, or realized the separation between an investment vehicle like a 401k or an IRA or an HSA, which I learned you can invest in, versus the investments that you choose to go inside of it. It's a two-step process. And the good thing about a 401k is that it becomes a one-step process because the company sets up the 401k for you.
Right.
So investing had become, or has become, one of my favorite parts of personal finance, to break it down. And I the way I had to learn how to do this, Joe, I love going to high schools. One of the early high schools was my daughter's high school, right? And so when I talk about the stock market, and that's kind of the basics for understanding how to invest, right? And I even get questions about that from young people. They're very, very smart. So the way I started teaching it, I didn't do a presentation. I created a game, and the game was called the S&P 500 game. So I got all these S&P 500 companies. I had the logo of each, and then I would put up the ticker. Now, and I would tell them, before you play any game, what do you got to do? Because you're a game guy, Joe. What do you got to do? You got to know the directions.
Sure.
You got to know how to play. So I explained to them in like 3 sentences what the S&P 500 is. It's the 500 largest companies. And then I'll go around the room and I'll say, what kind of shoes are you wearing? Nike, they're in the S&P 500. Have you gone to Chipotle in the last week? Yeah, I go there all the time. They're in the S&P 500. What kind of phone do you have? It's an Apple. They're in the S&P 500. So immediately I'm letting them know that this is something they're already familiar with. And then I'd throw out the ticker and they would yell out the company, or I'd show the logo, they'd yell out the company. And then I would go buy gift cards, $10, $15 gift cards to S&P 500 companies and give them out. I would do drawings for the little tickets. So the favorites were Chipotle, Starbucks, and I never gave them an Apple. They all wanted an Apple iPhone. I'm like, I'm not doing that. So those were the favorites. And I taught it to them in terms of a game. And that's exactly how I start to explain it to people. And it's not to suggest an investment or anything, but just to sort of deconstruct what this is, because they've probably heard that term S&P 500 or the stock market and didn't know what it means. And then if they're a little bit older and I know that they probably have a 401k, I always start with that, because most people start investing via their 401k. Sometimes I would be in a room and I would say, who's an investor? Raise your hand. And only about half will raise their hand. When I ask the follow-up question, who has a 401k or a 403b or some kind of employer retirement plan? Everybody raises their hand.
Isn't that funny? I am an investor.
You are an investor. So that's one of the sort of takeaways or one of the action items for them to do. Take a look at what you have in your 401k and make sure it's set up the way that you want it to be set up. But it is intimidating, Joe, because like you said, it's a lot of different investments. It's hard to know who's telling you the right thing. Everything from crypto's the way to go, buying options is the way to go, buying futures, it's just so much messaging out there depending on where you consume your information, that just to break it down to in simple terms goes a long way.
You could just keep it easy, buy the S&P 500, you're buying 500 biggest companies and you're going to be okay. I love that.
At minimum, it's a starting point, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And you know what? I think to your point too, once you started learning more about it, then you give yourself the chance to get excited because you got some money in there and you're like, oh, and then it goes down and you go, what did I do wrong? And often you didn't do anything wrong. And then you learn that too, which is cool.
Yeah.
And I wanted to draw that point because I know there's a bunch of people listening to this, Jackie, and you do too, that are sitting at a desk at a job that they hate and they don't want to be there. And you point out that, again, keeping it simple, Jackie keeps it simple, says you really only have three choices. You can stick it out and it can continue to suck, or you can leave and try to find something new, or you find the FIRE movement, which means I can then decide that I do whatever I wish. And your point is the FIRE movement isn't so much about this rainbow at the end, I feel like, as it is being in control now for the first time.
Yeah, it really is. And I was in that third bucket where I had been at my job long enough. And once I started looking at my numbers and making sense of them, I'm like, you know what? I can actually cut out. I like my job just fine. I like my boss. I like the people that I work with, right? It just wasn't my dream job. And I knew I started realizing that I had a bigger mission and I wouldn't be able to do that and work full time. I wouldn't be doing half the stuff I'm doing now.
Yeah, I love the fact that you gave yourself the flexibility to go whenever the hell you chose. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like for the first time now, you're like, yeah, I'm staying, but I'm staying because I like it today.
Yeah. I had a fun writing that resignation letter, but so that's what everybody has to do. They have to look at their situation. Yeah, some people are just at a sucky, toxic job, right? But not everybody. Some people may actually like their job and they might not want to run away. They may come up with a 3 to 5 year plan, like my co-host Bill on Catching Up to 5. He has decided he's going to pull back a little bit, but he's going to continue working for a few more years. Or, you decide I've been a little too conservative here. I am able to retire now. I understand how to look at my numbers and how that math works when I retired. And I was just mentally not wanting to do something different or just didn't feel comfortable with it. So you have choices and the journey is pretty fun. It is. My mind was so different when I knew I was leaving work than when I was like grinding it out. Like when I knew I was leaving, I would really push hard on the hard questions. Like now this was pre-COVID, right? Because I retired in 2019. So I was doing a job, where I could work from home. I wasn't allowed to. Nobody in our group was allowed to, but as long as I had a computer, VPN token, and a phone, I could do my job remotely, but they would not let us do it. So I kept asking the question. I'm like, I really don't understand. Can you tell us again why that's such a big deal? We've got other people in the company that are doing. So I just felt more comfortable pushing the envelope because I'm like, what are they going to do? Right? What are they going to do? I was always respectful
Go ahead,
about it.
Fire me.
Yeah.
Let's do some of the things. Let's get tactical here for a second to help people get that flexibility that you teach. First thing you say is to slash expenses. If we're cutting, Jackie, what do we cut first?
Oh gosh, don't cut out things you love. Don't cut out things that make you happy. So I like to almost do like a reverse psychology stuff. Instead of cutting, first thing, look at the things you absolutely love that are no negotiation. You have to have it. Move those things to the front of the stage and then turn around and look what's left.
This feels like Marie Kondo. Does it? This is Jackie Marie Kondo.
Yeah, there you go.
Does it spark joy? If it sparks joy, keep it.
Yeah, people hate budgets because they relate it to cutting and removing things out of their lives that makes them happy. If you reverse that psychology mentally, you are going to go after it with a little more enthusiasm, and maybe you'll actually get to it and not procrastinate because you think it's a bad thing. So that's the way that I do it. And we're all going to have some things that maybe we decide is worth spending a little more money on than the average person is. And that's okay. You don't have to be the masses, but you have to, make it work. And, just knowing where you're starting, and figuring out, okay, you got to figure out what part of the formula you need most help with. Like for some people, they have an income problem. Well, that might mean they need to get a skill or go back to school and increase that. Some people don't have an income problem. If you make $300,000 a year and you still can't make it work, you may have a spending problem. So you got to figure out where is the gap? Like what is the area that you got to put a little more focus on to make this work the way you want it to work?
I love that these are my strengths. My income is my strength, or my income is my weakness. Right. And then where is my weakness? Maybe my spending is a strength that I have, which AKA if I'm not making enough money. Gosh, I remember when I meet with those people when I was a financial planner, they come in, they're like, we've cut everything. I'm like, yes, you have. Guess what we got to do? We got to figure out how to make more money. Speaking of that, you talk about create a side hustle. A side hustle can be a great deal for a lot of people. What are some of the side hustles you see people do that really are great ideas, maybe for somebody to get involved with side hustles?
Right now, it's probably the best time for side hustles than ever in history. Okay. You've got certain jobs that's set up to be a side hustle. Like if you drive for Uber, if you do DoorDash, if you might want to do something like that. However, I love the idea when people think about their strengths, like you just mentioned, even if you're really, really young and you love to tinker with iPhones and you know how to fix them and the vast majority do not. You start being that person in the neighborhood, in the community, whoever that can fix your iPhone because people are willing to pay for it. Maybe you know how to change out the battery much cheaper than Apple. So get creative.
Like just the fact that you've got this skill that nobody can take away from you and your boss can't fire you because your boss is your customer. Now I've got my own thing. Let's finish here, Jackie, by building a dashboard because there's some measuring sticks people are going to need to know as they chase financial independence. What are some of the big measurements that I need to know? I ask this because you say in your book, you didn't know what net worth was until like your late 30s, which is funny because I read that and I'm like, A, you're right. That's kind of funny. But B, I don't know that net worth is really that important to know. Like not as much as my investable assets that I can burn. Right. You know what I mean? Like that's a more important number. Like what are some of the things I need to track on the way to financial independence?
Yeah, that tracking part is really important because the average person doesn't know like some of these important numbers. Like for instance, if I ask someone what their expenses are, they will usually tell me what their salary is at work, which is a very different number. So you do need to know the different incomes. Okay. Sometimes that's measured by what is your gross income. That's what you see in the offer letter, right? That's your gross income. But then what's your net income? What's your take home pay? After you get your 401k contributions taken out, your health insurance taken out, and whatever other benefits you have, what is the take home? And then how much is being taken out with taxes? Most people can't even tell you what they pay in taxes. They might be able to tell you, oh, I think I'm in the 12 or the 24% tax bracket. But what's the dollar amount? What's the number? And some people don't even think you have flexibility with that. When I started looking at my taxes, boy, I was able to manage some things a little differently because that helped me make the decision between contributing to a traditional 401k or Roth 401k. One year I went all in with Roth in my 401k. And you know what? I was a single mom. I lost out on, I think it was a child tax credit because my income was too much. So I'm like, okay, I gotta redo this. And then I tried half and half or whatever. So know what you're paying in taxes. Most people can just go to their tax return and go look at the first page. What are you paying in taxes? What is your income, the gross and the net? For me, that was the most powerful exercise I did around my money. Part of it was because I had to pull together all these pieces that I had never done before. I had an old 401k, an old IRA, my HSA. Oh, is that an asset? I brought that in. So this is a great exercise, but you're right. There's a big distinction between your investable assets and your net worth. Your investable assets, that's what's working for you. Okay. For instance, a house. Okay. You got to live in your house. So you can't really use that if you needed to pay something. So when it comes to retiring or reaching what they call your FIRE number, that's the 25 times your expenses, which is sort of a component of the 4% rule. But getting to your 25 times your expenses, that is your nest egg to live on. Okay. So you don't count consumer assets like your home and your car and things like that. You just got to count those investable assets. So your FIRE number, your net worth, you need to know how much debt you have. If you have, unfortunately, I know a lot of people that do start with a lot of debt. You got to figure that out. I know it's scary opening the envelope. It's scary getting the emails or the red letters that are saying you're delinquent and stuff like that. But you got to know those numbers. Go pull your credit report. You can pull that every week from annualcreditreport.com. It used to be once a year. Now you can do it once a week, right? They made that permanent. So those are some of the main things that you want to look at where you start. Because you know what, Joe? It feels so good when you start to see your progress, whether it's building your assets, whether it's paying off your debt, whether it's increasing your income. When you see progress, those are wins. Have yourself a glass of wine or a glass of ice water, whatever you drink to celebrate the little, the little wins, the little things.
Yes. It's about the journey.
Yeah. It's about the journey.
Yeah. I see people that do some painful things. They don't have any joy. Then they show up at financial independence and they're like, oh, this isn't as fun as I thought it was, because it's about the journey.
And having some kind of purpose on the other side. Our friend Doc G wrote the purpose code. But having like some idea of what's on the other end. I ended up working 2 more years at my job, partly because I didn't have like what the other side looked like. I'd worked in the corporate world, worked a regular job my whole life. I didn't know anything else. So knowing what's on the other side, that's going to be a big part of it too, Joe.
Jackie, thank you so much for mentoring our stackers today on getting themselves some flexibility. You and I call it the FIRE movement, but I think for the larger audience, this is just about buying yourself the flexibility to do whatever lights your fire. Fire for Dummies is Jackie's book. It's available everywhere, I assume, right?
Yeah, it's available everywhere. You can go to Amazon. If you love independent bookstores, you can find it there as well. And you know what? If you just don't want to spend the money, it should be at your local library. If it's not, then ask for it. I'd love for everybody to walk through this kind of like we just did.
Absolutely. And we just touched on it, by the way. Oh my goodness. This is like 360 pages. Holy cow.
Yeah, that's 370.
But who's counting?
Who's counting?
Jackie, thanks a lot.
All right, Joe, this was awesome.